Hello, this is Colleen Wilbur, Chief Operating Officer for PSI. And on behalf of all of us here at PSI, we thank you for attending. These are very difficult times, and PSI is dedicated to assisting our schools and communities in coping with the returning to school amidst the stress and the fear of COVID-19 pandemic. That's why we're grateful to have a panel of experts in the field with us today. This panel will discuss many of the hot topics that we're facing and that school leaders are facing, parents, students, and the community. The webinar will be structured into 5 separate segments, giving each discipline 10 to 15 minutes to answer the moderator questions. At the end of the last segment, the moderator, which is me, will ask random questions to the panelists that you all have submitted. The only way that you can submit questions is if you use the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen. Also note that we will be providing a poll for you during each segment to find out if you want to learn more about the any of those sections, and then we can make sure to connect you with the panel of experts to get you more of the information that you are most interested in. Joining us today on the panel, and if you guys don't mind just giving a little wave because everybody can see, the attendees can see you. So joining us on the panel today from Impact Group, Chris DeMauro. He will be discussing school messaging. From Drive Mind Group, we have Jim Bostic and J.R. Supes to discuss environmental infectious control in schools. You guys, did you wave? I looked down so I could read your name. Great. From PSI's Educational Support Services, Dr. Julie Wood and Dr. Scott Poland to discuss social emotional impact. From Pisanick Partners, Maureen Pisanick and Sarah Carlson to discuss school nutrition considerations. And finally, from PSI School Health Division, Meredith Sitko and Dr. Carly Wilbur to discuss school health considerations. The bios for each of these members will be included at the end of the slide presentation, and I can try to, flip over to those so that you all can see those at the end. Before we begin, there's a few housekeeping details I wanted to go through. During this presentation, the audience will be electronically muted. If you have questions, like I said earlier, please use the question and answer function to submit them. At the end, the panelists will answer as many as possible depending on how much time we have. And then also, we are recording this presentation for those who couldn't register or attend the live broadcast. And I have one more section. We do have a disclaimer for this that I need to read out loud. Today's webinar is for informational purposes only. PSI is presenting the webinar based on our collaborative partnership with established school health specialists. PSI makes no claim that the webinar will guarantee the absence of COVID-19 or other contagious infections among school staff, students, visitors, student families, etc. PSI is not responsible for school-based interpretations of our suggestions and/or recommendations. These are only recommendations and suggestions. The final decisions are made by the appropriate school authorities, not by PSI staff. All right, and now on behalf of everybody at PSI, I'm pleased to moderate this amazing panel of experts, and we're gonna get started. So we are going to start with Impact Group. Chris, we're gonna get going through these questions. So I know that just an hour ago, we got an update from Governor DeWine that, maybe you'd like to just throw out there for our attendees.
Yeah, for all of our school attendees, I'm sure you're aware about an hour ago, the governor released a statewide mask mandate for all individuals ages 10 and up, which includes both indoor facilities and outdoor facilities in the absence of exercise and those sorts of things, which I know for many school partners, for school leaders, it's completely changed their philosophies and their conversations with their communities on what they're going to have kids do when we return here in T-minus a month. So I'm certain if you're like any of our partners, you're scrambling a little bit right now if you had chosen a strong recommendation of a mask mandate as opposed to a requirement.
And so I guess that leads right into our first question about how does my district or school ensure that COVID-related communications stand out from normal systems of communication when we're trying to get out these types of messages when they're all coming in every second, feels like?
It's a great question. Schools in Ohio do an excellent job of communicating to their stakeholders. So I want to start by saying that. But there are many intricacies, like all of the folks that are going to talk today. COVID brings a very special set of circumstances. I think we need to understand and operate under the assumption that our parents, our caregivers, even our community stakeholders they have a thirst for information, and they need that information quickly and accurately. And so I think it would behoove all schools, districts, partners to create separate platforms for their COVID communications, whether that's a special tab on the website. We have been recommending for our school partners the websites. So we create content, we create video. All of those now are under pop-up, where the moment you log on to district name website, you're receiving COVID pop-ups almost immediately. We're pushing updates rapidly. Many school districts have chosen to do those daily based on high yield information. So lately, with the release of restart plans, that's happened again almost daily. It's essential that districts, school leaders create a separate piece of communications that is in some way, shape, or form different from what families are traditionally used to separate these things so that it's easily searchable, easily identifiable, and most importantly, community friendly.
Right. Chris, I actually was just going to ask that, is it most appropriate to make it all separate, all the stuff related to COVID, or try to integrate it into your current systems of communication? How's everybody, the districts you work with?
That's a great question. And our recommendation is that this is one of those things that's large enough where it needs its separate bucket of communications. And an attempt to integrate this, I think because of the vastness of the information that needs to be shared, we would hate for any piece of this to be lost in what would be a normal translation. So if you're a district that provides a quarterly newsletter, and that's a pretty routine function, we would absolutely suggest that you do a COVID related newsletter. I know many people probably think that's over the top, and what really is there to communicate on a weekly or monthly basis. But when you get granular with some of these ideas of how operation in a COVID environment is going to affect operations from as simple as student drop-off pickup to how things are going to flow in the lunch line, to what athletics and student opportunities are going to look like at all of those varying grade levels, it really is a recipe for items to get lost. And so what we want to do is define those swiftly, accurately, so that a family can understand them. Our target is always 3 seconds. What is the 3-second message that a district can provide in any one of these functions so that it easily resonates, so that it's digestible for a layperson? Oftentimes, I was guilty of it when I was a school administrator. We want to use school language, we want to use acronyms, and we want to use the speak that all of us are familiar with. And we need to really go backwards and understand that many of our families, they get caught up and they get lost in some of the jargon.
Yeah, Chris, and one of the things that I think is already happening with communications and with everything that we're sending out, and with all the unknown questions out there, how does a school district best handle the negativity that might be coming in, or the negative feedback, or the families, or the people who don't agree with some of the communications the school's sending out?
Sure. We would suggest that obviously in all scenarios here, transparency is the key. And also that we want our school partners to rely on the research and on the community engagement that hopefully they have performed. And if you haven't performed it, you should be doing that yesterday. We want school leaders to be armed with the data that came from their key stakeholders, namely students and families, signifying here are our desires to operate in this environment. Now, obviously, community engagement initiatives are one piece of the pie. We're certainly going to look to health experts and the CDC guidelines and our local Board of Health guidelines to make some of those decisions, but it's all part of a larger pie where we can take an honest look at our community and our families to say, here was the feedback, here is our decision based on the feedback, and in a very transparent manner, we believe that that shows they've done their due diligence in making an informed decision. And Colleen, to your point, certainly, like all things school related, there's going to be folks that simply disagree. And we would suggest that we do our best to try to continue to inform those people who have varying thoughts of the data that backs these decisions.
Right. Well, and so you're mentioning the community, and I'm curious, or we're curious, how much do you involve the people who are outside of your school community in this kind of communication?
Sure. I think it's important to do. I wouldn't want to say that a community member is any less important than a family or a person that has a really detailed and deep connection to this decision. But at the same time, we know that all of our public school partners consistently operate in a fiscal mode where, unfortunately, even though it's been ruled unconstitutional now for close to 3 decades, we operate on a levy system, and transparency among our taxpayers is important. So we would argue and suggest that all of the folks in your community that have any sort of a stake in the school district, whether that's a senior citizen, a mom or a dad, a young family, students themselves, when you really get detailed with this sort of information, at our level, when we work with school partners, we're asked to create different messages for different segments. We think the complexity that brings is a really strong component of why a message in this scenario to a senior citizen looks way different than it does to a parent. But we want to show our due diligence in all those areas.
Interesting. An extra layer that the districts need to think about.
It is.
So if you were to say top 3 COVID communication tactics a school should use,
Yep.
What would you do? What are your 3?
Here's the impact group's top 3. All of your district communications, no matter who you are, whether you know it or not, it points folks back to your website. So we would suggest a tried and true website audit starting now. Someone on your district team needs to move through every single page of that website, and they need to determine how functional it is and how many clicks it takes for any interested party to find COVID-related information. Any more than 2 clicks, something is very, very wrong. We know as well that the content on those pages should be updated probably every 24 to 48 hours. Families are logging onto websites, and I can tell you this is data informed because we look at analytics of our partners' websites. We know how often folks are logging on and the email addresses of the folks that are logging on. And I can tell you in all sincerity that most of our district's websites right now are getting in upwards of 5,000 to 10,000 hits per day from interested parties who are simply looking for updates. So if families are logging into your website, they're seeing old content, they're seeing content that is not updated. God forbid, they're seeing content from last spring. It needs to be refreshed almost immediately with any sort of update. Video works wonders right now. We've been doing a lot of video superintendent chats, leadership team chats, where they're simply providing updates in a bunch of different functional areas. So back to the question, number 1, 100% is an updated website. Number 2 is a content calendar that includes social media streams, whatever your district uses. Most are very large on Facebook. Most are very large on Twitter. Some utilize LinkedIn. Some utilize other social media engines. But a very detailed content calendar where information is being pushed to followers very routinely. We're suggesting 6 to 10 touch points per day that are simply updates. It is an update on transportation. It's an update on food service. It's an update on school nursing. The list goes on and on. I know a lot of districts aren't prepared quite yet to be very granular with that information. And in those scenarios, all it really sounds like is here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here's when you're going to find out. I think at its core, as a father of 2 school-age girls, that's all I can really ask for in the end is please let me know what you know right now. be transparent about what you don't know, and provide some guidance on when you might know. I think most reasonable people would accept that sort of a rationale in terms of communication. So website, pushing out social media. 3, this can be embedded in either one of those. Video is the winner right now. Video works. Small snippets of video are attractive to families. They want to see and hear the voices of school leaders. It's comforting, it's reassuring. It's very, very different than the old school, typed up letter that you used to receive in the mailbox. And that's not to say that snail mail doesn't have its place, because it's beginning to make somewhat of a resurgence in the communication circles now that people are home. But as much video as you can embed, whether that's staff spotlights. We did a nice piece the other day with some maintenance workers at one of our school districts who've just been working their tails off all summer to make sure that kids have a healthy, clean space, and thinking about the strategic priorities in their areas. And we documented their day, and we showed families how hard that district is working to make sure kids return to a clean environment.
Great. I appreciate that. Those are really great suggestions. We shot up the poll at the end on that question. So those of you that are interested in more information, we will get that for you from Chris and the Impact Group. And thanks so much, Chris. He'll stick around if we have time at the end, if anybody has other questions for him. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, moving along, we are going to go to Jim and JR with DriveMind Group. And so we are going to start some questions that are on everybody's mind, I think, with all the changing data and everything that's happening. Jim and JR hopefully can give us some insight into that. So I'm going to jump right in. So after a surface is disinfected, how long would it take to be recontaminated? And is there any way to prevent recontamination? I know a bunch of schools are thinking about this with kids and eating and everything else kids do on desks. So what do you think, Jim and JR?
No, thank you. That's a fantastic question. To the first part of the question, how long does it potentially take to recontaminate a surface after we have cleaned it / disinfected it? Typically, once that solution has dried, it can be recontaminated that quickly. So that is the challenge for most of us in our homes, and definitely in our schools, is how do we stay ahead of it? Because there's a whole lot of surface space out there. The second part of the question is there something we can do about it? Well, there actually is. There is a technology called an antimicrobial, which is a fancy way of basically saying that we have the ability to put down a coating or a shield on your surfaces that's at a microscopic level, a bunch of swords. And whenever a pathogen or a germ falls on that surface, it literally gets killed. It gets pierced, preventing cross-contamination infection. And that's what we're trying to eliminate, right? You don't want to pick up the flu or COVID or anything else like that from a dirty desk, a door handle, a light switch, a locker combination, the cafeteria table. All these places that are very high touch, we can help prevent that cross-contamination piece with a product called MyShield, which is a 2-in-1 process of where we can disinfect, we'll kill everything, and then that sealant will go down, and it can give you up to 30 days of protection on that surface.
Okay, so if that sounds amazing, and can I use it in my house?
Yes, you can.
4 little girls. Okay.
Understood.
All right. Now that's number 1. Number 2 question about that. So if schools don't have that, then what is the next? So is spraying, wiping, just using surface wipes the best way to disinfect that if they don't have that shield?
Yeah.
And then what's dwell and wet time? I've seen those terms and I don't get it.
Jimmy, you want to take this one?
Sure, that's no problem. I think the key word, Colleen, again, thank you for the invitation here to share, it is the best way. the way that you had asked the question, what is the best way? Bottom line is, any way per se is best, to make and to, try to get that surface clean, disinfected. And I think that's a big thing. And I'm going to go back to the tail end of what you just asked there about the wet and dwell time, because I don't think many of us really, and I can, tell you as we started this journey almost 2-3 years ago, and the things that we have learned, that well or wet time concept, basically, if you look on the back of any cleaning product, cleaning device you're using, it'll tell you how long that surface needs to stay wet, or that solution needs to dwell upon the surface to do its job. And it was interesting. We'd met with a couple restaurant owners and we were talking about that. And we actually came out and we looked at some of their products, and it said right there, wet, it says wet time. It'll say wet or dwell on your label. And it'll say, anywhere between 4 and 10 minutes that you need to leave that surface wet to allow that solution to completely do its job and kill everything on that surface. But I mean, well, let's be honest to what we do. In the sake of time, we're very much a spray and wipe, community, if you will. We want to get that surface sprayed. We want to wipe it down. And if we're not really focusing on, how long that surface needs to have that solution upon it, will it do something? Sure, absolutely. Will it be effective to what you actually, and again, thinking what Chris said, so important with our schools, considering that budget and what we're paying for these solutions, is it doing what we want it to do? So I think we need to be very careful. I would really recommend to our folks, take a look at what you're currently using and look at that wet and dwell time. Very important.
So then what would be the best way to apply the solutions that we're using?
JR, what do you think? I know we got some options there for them.
No, we do. So again, any way that you're going to apply a solution or a disinfectant is better, obviously, than not doing it all. And again, one way to kind of get around some of the wet time and dwell time is to be able to take potentially what you're using and put it through a piece of technology. And I'm sure a lot of us during this pandemic have seen on the news, guys with looks like space age guns or Ghostbusters spraying stuff. And a lot of those can be just a sprayer that has an electric pump, or a fogger, which basically just takes a liquid and pumps a bunch of air into it and turns it into a mist. What we really believe in and what our research has led us to is using a piece of technology called an electrostatic sprayer, which basically you're taking the solution and you're electrifying it before you put it down on the surface. And that does two things for us. The first thing that it does is it puts an opposite charge, a negative charge in the solution. So when it comes out, it literally starts wrapping around all the positive charge in the room. So if I would spray at the top of a desk, not only am I getting the desk, but it actually will start wrapping itself underneath the desk, down the legs of the desk, under the chair, and all of those kind of things. So we believe that is amazingly important to get that full 360-degree coverage using that kind of technology. The other thing that it does is it takes most traditional wet times or dwell times and turns them from 4 to 10 minutes to roughly 30 seconds to a minute. And that is very important. Now, I will caution everyone, not every solution that you currently have on hand will work through an electrostatic sprayer. It's very important to understand what can be put into an electrostatic sprayer versus what cannot. You're typically pretty safe if what you're using is a water-soluble disinfectant and not a chemical. And that's a whole nother conversation on SDS sheets and that kind of stuff. But that's a piece of technology that we typically are saving districts currently somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 75% savings on the amounts of solution you use, because you use far less solution, and also time. We're saving them a ton of time using this technology versus the traditional spray and wipe. And I think probably most important, we know we're getting the results that we believe we need to get.
That's one of the things I was just going to ask you, JR. There's a lot of technology and great options out there, but with schools, like Chris had said earlier, looking at budgets and kind of unknown about some of their budgets right now, is there a way for schools to get the right solutions and to get the right tools and technology that you're talking about, but still save money? It sounds like one of the things that you're saying is that you're going to use less of the solutions, which is one way that will help save money. Are there other ways?
Yeah, we believe, again, I think savings, and again, as a retired school administrator and have been in the business 30 plus years, yes, the solution and the monetary amount that we would save is fantastic, but we all know the biggest cost in running our schools is our human capital and our man hours. You know, so we did a little experiment at a local school district where there was 3 custodians in one room with towels and spray bottles, and we were in another room with our electrostatic sprayers, and it took them roughly about 30 minutes to spray and wipe down all the surfaces in the classroom. We did 2 rooms in 18 minutes using the electrostatic sprayers. Now, a couple other things that we think are really important when we tell that story is, one, they were only getting exposed surfaces. So they were getting the tops of the desks, mostly light switches, doorknobs, and those kind of things. We were getting every square inch of the room below 7 feet on the wall, including obviously the legs of chairs and under desks and every nook and cranny in those classrooms. And we weren't only disinfecting, but we also were putting that shield down at the exact same time. So we did 2 classrooms in 18 minutes. They did 1 classroom in 30 minutes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then there's one other thing that I keep hearing about, this log kill when it comes to disinfectants and solutions. Can you guys explain what log kill is?
Jimmy.
Yeah, log kill, basically what you'll see, and we've got a, really nice, handout we can share with anyone at any point to kind of show you that. Basically, when they're talking log kill, it's talking about, percentage of killing pathogen upon a square inch of a surface, if you will. If you look again on your products, take a look at some of your cleaning products, you'll see 99.9% effective, 99.99. Usually our logs run from log 1 to log 6. Log 6 is 99.9999. So we get 4 nines after that decimal point percent of kill, if you will. Essentially, that is right there at what we would call hospital grade disinfecting. Probably the closest to sterile you can get. Most of our hospitals will use that 99.9999 level because they deal with something referred to as C. diff that is, obviously a very powerful concern that they need to take care of. We use a hospital grade disinfectant. We also use 1 level less, 99 point with 3 nines, if you will. Again, looking at that square inch of how far or many pathogens we're leaving behind. Basically at 99.9, 3 nines, which again gives you that good disinfecting level. And again, not taking it to that hospital grade because again, we just don't have maybe in our homes, our businesses, our school environments, that level or that concern of C. diff as hospitals do.
Okay. That is a lot of great information. I am sure people are going to want some more details on that. Thank you, JR and Jim. These guys will stick around just like everybody else for the end. Very much appreciate that. And then make sure you guys fill out the poll that we just threw up so that we are able to get you more information from the Drive Mind group. Thanks, guys, so much. Okay, we are going to move along. And we are going to go to Dr. Julie Wood and Dr. Scott Poland to talk more about our educational services. 1 second. So things that we need to consider for education, I'm going to jump right in. So what at this point are some of the main questions schools have been asking as related to educational services?
Sure, and
Julie.
I can start with this one. You know, the majority of questions that we have received all summer and we're receiving now have mainly been centered around social emotional support. So most of the school leaders that we're talking to are just concerned about the experiences that students have gone through, and then how can we make sure that they're ready and able to learn when we're all going through this pandemic right now. And the concern is warranted. You know, about 20% of students we project under normal circumstances will have difficulties and need extra support with their social emotional learning at some point throughout their school career. And during this pandemic, researchers are predicting that that rate's going to double, if not triple, in the amount of students that are going to need support with their social emotional skills. So in order for us to really ensure that students are able and ready to learn, we really have to help support them so that they have support from faculty, staff, mental health professionals, so they're able to help and cope and deal with this.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that is the topic that keeps getting asked. What can the school administrators do now and before school starts to help prepare staff emotionally for school reentry? Because it's not just about the kids, you know, going back and being emotionally ready. It's about all the staff that have to go in there too.
You're right. This is going to sound basic, but the first thing that you can do, which is very simple, is to contact all of your staff. So staff that's returning, brand new staff, and just talk to them one-on-one about what are you going through? How has this pandemic impacted you personally? How can I support you? What resources do you might need? How are you taking care of yourself? And starting there with the basic. In order for our staff to be effective in their roles, they need to feel that they're heard and that they're supported, and that they are taking care of themselves first before they can help others. Outside of that, I would also recommend there's some education that's going to be needed. And I believe that Ohio has also mandated some education as well. So starting with just the basic facts about COVID and dispelling some myths. What are some things that you can do to help reduce transmission? And then how can our educators talk to students about COVID? So our kids are going to ask questions to the teachers in the classroom. So what are some recommendations we have for teachers on how they can answer those questions in a way that doesn't induce panic and fear in students? And then to piggyback a little bit on that is there are going to be students more now than ever before that are really going to have difficulty coping. They're going to have difficulty with anxiety and depression and dealing with this pandemic. So educating staff on how to recognize that in students. Depression and anxiety, it's not always going to look like a student, you know, walking into a room and they might have tears in their eyes. Depression looks different and manifests differently in everybody. So giving education to staff on, you know, what can you look for? What are the different symptoms of anxiety, depression, and how do you identify someone who's in distress? And then what's our protocol in our school for if you think someone needs extra help with their social emotional skills, where do you refer them to?
Mm-hmm. This is going to be a challenging time for those kids, but not just the kids. I think parents, how are we going to prepare parents to prepare their kids for reentry? Scott, do you have ideas about what we can do for the parents who probably are a little nervous about their kids going back to school? Scott, can you unmute, or Tammy, Scott?
I certainly do have some ideas, Colleen. I think one of the most important things we need to do for both parents, students, and even for older students is we need to provide them the opportunity to provide input into all the complex decisions that are being made. And everybody does better when they feel like at least their voice has been heard. And children's typical reactions to a traumatic event are They regress academically, behaviorally. They have nightmares, sleeping problems, and worries about the future. I think we could argue that the mental health needs of our students in the fall of 2020 may be the greatest in modern times. And we need to be thinking about how can we increase mental health services in our schools. And having spoken to a lot of school psychologists, they're worried that everybody's answer to a child's typical response is to think they need to be referred for a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Really what they need is grace and compassion and understanding, patience, tolerance, structure, and love. And where does that really begin? As Julie was saying, we really must help all the adults first. And once we've done that, hopefully the adults will be modeling optimism, hope for the future. And I came up with a little simple acronym. The word is calm, but the C can stand for so many things, not just staying calm, but recognizing what can we control, which is our reaction to the virus and following all the safety recommendations. The A stands for all the adults need to be available. They need to begin by simply asking their children, what do you know about the virus? What's on your mind? What would help you feel safer? And we truly need to listen. And then the M stands for not just the modeling from the adults, but also the management in our homes and making sure that our families are taking the proper precautions. And I think self-care plans have never been more important for everybody, for the staff, for the students, and for all of our families. Critically important.
And could I piggyback on a little bit of what Scott was saying? There are a lot of resources that are out there that if you are looking for something to put on your social media blast or newsletter to send into parents, even on PSI's website, we have different resources on our COVID tab if you want to go on there and just check out. But there are a couple books that we have on there and other resources as well that parents can simply read to their students or their kids about what is COVID, why are people wearing masks, why are people concerned about it, and what are some things that you can do yourself to help protect yourself, and what can you control around you. And then there's also a really great resource, and I can make sure that we can put that on our site for everyone to access if you're interested in by the end of the week, but it's called First Aid for Feelings. And it's a workbook, and it could be adapted for elementary kids all the way through high school. And it helps, there are like prompts that students would write, or they could draw their feelings, but it talks about, okay, you've heard about coronavirus, but what do you know? Tell me in your own words what it is. What are your concerns about it? What are some things when you're stressed out normally in life? What do you do to cope with that? And it kind of walks them through their own support plan. And this is, really relevant to this moment, COVID, but all of this workbook itself, you could apply to any type of situation that they're struggling with. And that's something that parents simply can sit down with their kids and do in about a half hour. So I would recommend something like that. And then this was mentioned a bit earlier, but if the more that kids know before going into school, that might help ease anyone's anxiety about what changes they're going to expect. So if teachers are able to take a picture of what the classroom setup's going to look like, and if they're able to email that out to their class before they begin on their first day, or just do a video kind of walkthrough of what the lunchroom is going to look like, or what recess is going to look like, that might be something helpful that parents can walk through with their kids and just let them know that, last year looked like this, but these are some changes that are going to happen this year, and show that to them so they can feel a little bit more comfortable about what they're walking into.
I think those are really practical and applicable things that schools and parents could do. Are there other things, Scott, that you think schools need to do at the start of the year to help support students?
Well, absolutely. And of course, we need to start by supporting the staff first. Hopefully school administrators, as several people have talked about, are reaching out to the staff over the summer. And when staff do return, There really needs to be a processing session for staff. And then in the classroom, my partner is a former director of instruction, and we've made available to PSI what we are calling a teachable moment, to implement in all classrooms in Ohio. Everybody who's interested, taking students through a number of important things that Julie's already mentioned today, but just providing them a chance in the classroom. And at the simplest level, everybody has a story to tell. And we have to honestly acknowledge that, yes, we'd like to think families grew closer together, they developed new traditions, and there were just a lot of wonderful bonding things in our families. But we'd be naive not to think that things like child abuse has gone up and probably been unreported. We have to recognize with more than 140,000 deaths, Ohio students, some of them lost a loved one, a grandfather, a cousin, somebody who was their choir director at church. And kids need an opportunity to talk and be heard. And then all of the financial concerns, we'd have to anticipate that we would have more homeless students than ever before. All of this means grace, compassion, understanding, and being patient about kids recovering all that lost learning. I hope educators, when they have to make a choice about how much to push academically, will just realize what so many students have gone through.
And we can make that teachable moment lesson plan that Scott mentioned available to everyone. We can put it on our website if you're interested to access by the end of the week. I did want to highlight, there are so many kids that are going to need help in this moment that it would behoove schools to really focus on your universal interventions that you're providing everyone. If you have a really good RTI or MTSS system in your building, focusing on tier 2 and tier 3, you may find that you're going to quickly exhaust your mental health resources. So just making sure that your universal support, so the interventions that you're providing to all the kids in the school or your class-wide intervention is really strong and is going to help about 80% of your population. And then some of the things that your teachers may want to focus on in those universal supports are just, what do you do when you're stressed out? How do you effectively cope? How do you ask for help? How do you work through, what's a problem-solving process that you can work through? And increasing connectedness, your relationships with teachers and friends, all of those skills are critical and the foundation to any student coping with any type of problem. And that's something that I would really encourage everyone to focus on now. And then if you're a school that you are really looking into what your social-emotional universal curriculum is going to be in the future, or you're kind of re-looking at what you have now, on ODE's website, they have an evidence-based clearinghouse that might help point you in some directions. And then you also may want to check out CASEL.org. It's CASEL.org, and that's a website just dedicated to social-emotional support. And they have a really good roadmap on there that if you walk through that, it could really help you develop in detail your school SEL plan. It has sample letters to parents, questions to ask students, questions to ask staff. And so you may want to check that out. And we could also, if you're interested, make that available as well.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Julie and Scott, those are really, really helpful tools and resources that you guys have offered. It's those basic needs, that love and that support that those kids need. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that information. I think we're going to move along to another basic need, and that's the health of our kids in the school. And we're going to move along to the Pisanick partners, Maureen and Sarah. So school nutrition is going to be a big topic. I know that that's been a lot of the topic with, just even our closures and openings in terms of restaurants and all of that, and schools have that kind of issue. So we're going to jump right in. So what are your thoughts, suggestions on making sure employees are safe to come into work and staying safe at work? You know, what happens, for example, if one of the kitchen employees tests positive for COVID? Does everyone have to quarantine? You know, what's your perspective on that at this point?
Sure, those are great questions, and I think concerns that I'm personally hearing from the schools that I work with on a regular basis. Pisanick Partners has over 30 school districts that we're trying to help get up and moving for the school year. So, and everybody's doing back to school in a little different fashion. So I think what we're coaching is that we have making sure that you're taking your temperatures at home, and that if you have any of the symptoms that you are reporting to your person in charge and choosing to stay home and not come to work. This is not a time to be a hero or take one for the team, like stay home and stay safe. We are going to mandatory make them take their temperature when they come on site as well before they even enter the building. Somebody will be at the back of the kitchen area each morning taking temperatures and signing off and asking again, do you have any of these symptoms? And if they do, sending them directly home so that they're never in the building or coming into contact with anything. As far as for once they get in the building, ensuring proper hand washing. Again, that's going to be super important that we wash hands as soon as they come in. Ensuring that they're wearing their facial coverings. I know that it's going to be quite warm. We've had a pretty warm summer, especially for Ohio. Typically 90s to 100 degrees isn't typical for us. So, and I know it's going to be warm when we come back to school, and a lot of our elementary buildings do not have air conditioning, but we have to keep ourselves safe and we have to keep everybody around us safe. So, and you know, the governor did require that now. So that is going to be a requirement and was going to be for school food service anyway, moving forward. So that's one way to keep them safe. The next way is that we are looking at when we're planning the menus, how do we do so that we can utilize the space that we have and keep everybody 6 feet apart when possible. Again, some of our elementary kitchens are teeny tiny. So thinking, you know, do we need to move some of the prep space out into the cafeteria, things like that, so that we can obviously keep everybody socially distanced, because that's typically not something that we do or worry about in a regular school year. So resetting up menus and workspace and workflow to make sure that that happens. And then I think a big thing is that we're encouraging all of our schools to think through, okay, now that you're coming up with a plan of how you're going to come back to school and how you're going to feed the kids, what that modality looks like, whether they're coming to the cafeteria to eat, whether we're feeding in the classroom, looking at amending your HACCP plan and sending it to your local health department to be reviewed. Every health department is handling things and interpreting things a bit differently, and those are ultimately the go-to people of who's going to be enforcing the regulations. So just making sure that you have a very specific plan in place, that no matter how you're serving the kids, that the food is being served to them safely. We're keeping the kids safe, we're keeping the staff safe, because that's obviously most important. And as far as the information that we've been given from the health departments and the counties that we work with is that so long as the person so if one of my ladies would test positive for COVID, if nobody had been within 6 feet of her for 10 minutes or longer, we are not required to quarantine the whole entire kitchen. Now, if we come into a situation where Susie is directly across from Paula and they were less than 6 feet apart and it was for a prolonged period of time, we would have to quarantine both of the ladies to ensure that Paula doesn't come and spread what Susie has. So that is the current guidance from the local health departments in Cuyahoga, Summit, Portage, Stark, Summit County areas thus far.
Yeah, that's helpful, Sarah, to know that you guys have done all that research and put all that in place. You know, you're in there in the kitchen feeding our kids, so it feels good and comfortable that you guys have gone through all those processes. What about the actual meals, and how do you concentrate on having wholesome recipes, menus, and feeding all the kids without having every single thing individually wrapped? How will that work?
Sure. So I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've actually been combating the entire first half of this week, has been everybody misinterpreting the guidelines that everything has to be IW or individually wrapped. That's not the case. So it's not that it has to come from the manufacturer in a package. It's just that it needs to be contained when it's served to the students. So if you're putting and building a meal, you can still have a cheeseburger if it's wrapped. You can still have fries as long as they're in a container and covered. You can still serve fresh fruits and vegetables and utilize your DOD money through favors just making sure again that everything is covered. So it's almost as if acting like nothing is under a sneeze guard is how I'm kind of coaching my ladies to think about how we're going to prepare food. Because again, first of all, we want to be smart with our budgets, because all of our budgets pretty much took a fairly large hit in March, April, and May. And with the increased food prices and increase in paper supplies, which could be upwards of 25 to even up to 40% come August, is what we're being told, that we need to be cognizant that we're using commodity dollars and spending money appropriately. And again, if everybody wants those IW products, I'll use Uncrustables as a great example. We all pulled those like crazy and made Smuckers do some serious overtime in the last part of the school year last year. There isn't going to be enough for everybody. So, and we want to make sure that everybody has something good to eat. And a lot of times things that come in those individually wrapped aren't the healthiest. They tend to be the highest processed items. And we would love, at least the schools that we work with, we coach to offer fresh produce every day as an option. So you can do that so long as that it is covered. You can get those meals, so you can do things. People worry about equipment and spending money. There is something called a tilt procedure. So that's time in lieu of temperature. If you're having to deliver meals to the classroom and you don't have a bunch of very expensive fancy equipment and you don't have the funds to buy it, and right now everything is on back order until October, November, December, so you're not going to be ready for August anyway if you haven't already purchased those items. That's another great way to be able to provide healthful meals to your students. So that's giving you time, so about 4 to 6 hours to get the food, so long as it stays in the temperature control zone. We serve food in much shorter time than that. So you should easily be able to package the food hot, hold it in the cafeteria, and wheel it to the classrooms and it still make temperature. So those are just some ways to think about. We also provide, we use a USDA approved software called Healthy Meal Planner Pro, and we make all of our recipes in there, and we have a good deal of speed scratch recipes. So we might not be making every single item completely from scratch, but putting items together and then putting them in containers ourselves. It gives us a chance to obviously keep plate costs down while also providing healthy meals to the kids.
And I think that goes into something I was thinking about. So if there's anything more to expand on that, but you know, one of the risk factors that we have to think about with COVID is having any underlying diet related chronic diseases. And so how do you promote, you were talking about, Sarah, you know, we don't have unlimited resources in terms of money, but how do you do this so that we can still keep those kids safe and not have to go to all the highly processed foods? And I think you gave us some examples just now, but is there anything else you think that we should add to that?
Sure. So we are working through, when we look at health related, so allergies, we have lots of kiddos with allergies. So making sure that we're putting the kids through the point of sale when they order in the morning, whether you're going to do a Google form or however your school decides is the best modality to get lunch orders, and ensuring that the student isn't picking anything that could be a potential allergy. I think one of the biggest things in K-12 is peanut allergies, and the Uncrustables seems to be the favorite easy grab and go. I don't think we'll really have to worry about Uncrustables because they're not going to be very easily available for us this year, but making sure that we're tagging, if you have a tagging system, so that your ladies know this contains dairy, it contains eggs, putting a child's name specifically on something. If you made a salad without cheese because a child has a dairy intolerance or allergy, that you're clearly coding that. So if you are passing out meals in the classroom, the students get the right meals, because I think that is the scariest thing as we plan to go back to school and manage allergies, is that if we're away from our point of sale system, it's a little harder to keep track of that. So just thinking through those things so that it's easily, that your staff can easily see that when they're passing them out.
Yeah, that's a great idea. One of the other things, the USDA has provided local communities some flexibility from what we understand in serving the needs of the students. There's a number of waivers that are going on right now with school reopening and operating next year. And as everybody's beginning to plan for that, I think that having to also plan for, you know, blended environments and not that traditional environments. There's a current waiver, Maureen, I'm hoping you can talk to us a little bit about, which I might get this wrong, the continuation of non-congregate meals and flexibility in meal service time. Can you talk to us a little bit about those waivers? And there's also an additional one for Maureen, you can say that word for me.
I can help you. Yeah, so we
are
are
for the schools. Yeah.
We are so, we understand that it is very complicated to understand and interpret USDA memos. Way back at the beginning of the pandemic, we reached out to the Department of Education. Bridget Hires was one of the key people and said, listen, other schools are in other states are doing restart guidance. Can we please help? It's not just enough to point people to USDA memos. It's what does it mean in terms of how you deliver the food and what is legal? Because again, you know, first and foremost, wholesome meals fuel healthy lives. Kids can't learn unless they're fed and nourished. And all of our co-panelists, I love the idea. It's very unlike me not to be the one talking all the time, but I surround myself with all the supports. And Sarah is our HACCP expert. Sarah is also a previous auditor for the state of Ohio. So really leaning into the conversation as to what these waivers mean in terms of the legalities of what your food service operations must kind of check the boxes. We would like to say the non-congregate is what we transitioned into the pandemic feeding, where we were all able to pick up from the most of us in our school districts, curbside meals or meals delivered, even though we were doing remote scholar learning versus in-person learning. That will continue. And that's why you see a lot of schools coming up with hybrid models where some schools will allow for that opt-in option for students to be able to stay at home and be a remote learner if that's their comfort level and their parents' comfort level or their medical need. So certainly that would mean if their economic need is still to receive a meal, that option is going to be available. What the ODE has stated they will do, we're a part of the Restart Task Force, which we're super proud to be a part of. There will be a waiver chart that ODE will be making available early in August. And school professionals will need to apply via, they're saying it's going to be like a MailChimp survey that they would like to opt in to continue leveraging the use of waivers. Our recommendation at Pisanick is apply for the waivers. Even if you don't think you need it now, you don't have a plan in school food service unless you have a plan A, B, C, D, sometimes now this year all the way down the alphabet. So many of us are planning plans related to the color-coded system that the governor announced in terms of how meals will be provided. Some of us are providing multiple modalities. Some will have students come and pick up curbside for 3 days a week, and then they're in school 2 days a week, and those schools, half of the kids will eat in the cafeteria, half will eat in the classroom. So what that means for school food service, they really need to have 3 plans, right? And sometimes 3 menus, depend upon how that's all gonna work. So, you know, I think we talked about great ideas, and one of the ideas Pisanick is saying with all of these waivers, all of these procedures, is exactly what my panelists and colleagues around us have said, and that is make sure you're doing short videos to teach your kids. You know, one of the best things about school nutrition and why we're so passionate about it is, again, kids cannot learn if they're hungry. And it also tends to be one of the fun and social aspects of the day that I think many kids in our communities have verbalized missing, being physically in school. So capitalizing on nourishing foods, continuing to make the cafeteria an extension of the classroom, focusing on supporting students. You know, nutrition is wonderfully important as a part of the whole child approach, social, emotional, everything we just talked about today. So thank you for inviting Pisanick to be a part of this panel. I'm learning a lot today, and I hope the conversations continue.
Yeah, absolutely, Maureen. That's really helpful. I have one more question before we move on.
Sure.
What about getting all that communication out to parents and families about what's going on with meals? So, you know, parents are worried about all the practical things, and meals has to be one of them. What would you suggest?
100%. So we always, you know, again, Healthy Meal Planner Pro is the software system we utilize. It is a virtual real-time menu. Parents can hover over not only the menu content to decipher things like allergens, attributes, even things like build a meal if you're a diabetic student and you're wanting to know how many carbohydrates you consume in a meal. Those are all available via an electronic menu platform. And if you don't have an electronic menu platform, those are the types of informations you need to be transparent. So menu transparency via your district's website. I know many, you know, I love the Impact Group. We co-work with them in a lot of our districts to amplify the messaging to parents, short videos, the nutrition website, and social media. I know a lot of families are on social media, and so a lot of the parent-teacher groups, PSOs, whatever it's called in your district, they post a lot of things about the food, even just weekly announcements of what's on the menu. And so for me, you know, for us, we're coaching towards, you know, continuing to do short video messaging, updates, being transparent, using social media to the best of possibilities. And then certainly inclusion in handbooks, inclusion in e-newsletters. And the last tip is many schools use the Google platform. Many of our nutrition departments have elected to go to a Google form to not only ask questions about child participation in the school nutrition program, but also to give out information. So a Google form can be something that gets you information, but also can disseminate appropriate information. We even one of our schools highlighted like a nutrition fact. And of course, we're still in the mission of doing Harvest of the Month and fresh foods and education. So, you know, again, utilizing technology, I think all of us, the silver lining to the COVID cloud, are now more used to this being the way we gain information. So if you're a food service that hasn't operated in using virtual technology, you know, tying into your district's technology, and certainly other supports on this webinar, like the Impact Group, is an awesome way to get communication out to parents.
Thank you. Completely appreciate that, Maureen and Sarah. With Pisanick Partners, we are going to move to our last segment now, and we are going to move on to our school health considerations, and this is with Meredith Sitko and Dr. Carly Wilbur. So let's jump right into let's just jump right in and ask the best question. Why are schools reopening? They closed in March when we had a couple thousand cases, and now the US case is over 3 million. Why are we opening?
Dr. Wilbur, you can take that one.
I was debating whether or not to unmute myself for that. So the truth is, while the contagion risk has not dropped, there is strong evidence that resuming school routines is the best route forward for the country's economic health and for children's educational and mental health stability. We know more now than when this started, and we know how to keep kids safe. Kids will accept that they have to wear a mask and keep their distance because they're a little more used to it now. There's hope that this can work.
Well, I appreciate that honesty. And I've heard this multiple times from school. You know how that goes. So, can't COVID at school.
So I don't know if it was my feed or yours. Did you ask how can you guarantee that your child won't catch COVID?
Colleen, your feed was a little choppy on our end too. I caught the tail end of that, Dr. Wilbur. I think that is what she asked.
That is what she asked. I can hear her through my door.
Privacy first. Okay. So yeah, I can't guarantee that your child won't catch COVID at school or at the grocery store. Or did we lose her? Oh, hi, Colleen. Are we still moving now?
I think we are still moving.
All right. So there are no guarantees, and it's frustrating, but that is the truth. Every effort is being made to mitigate the risk of contagion. There is no guarantee that you can eliminate it, not in school, not anywhere.
Oh, okay. Next question. I will take over as moderator then. Is it necessary to assess and take student temperatures at the door prior to students entering? What's your take on that?
You, Meredith.
Meredith?
Carly, I'll take a stab at this one first, and then Dr. Wilbur, please fill in where you feel necessary. So it is best practice to take temperatures and complete a health assessment of all people prior to entering school buildings, including students and staff. We've talked about that already. And Tammy, the governor has tasked school teams with vigilantly assessing for symptoms consistent with COVID-19 to limit exposure and create that safe school environment, safest as possible. And so the best way to confirm that we're doing that is doing that process actually at the door. And so that being said, this process does present challenges, and not all schools have the resources to facilitate it. However, we do encourage all schools to consider all ways, even outside of the box ways, to make that process happen. That said, if the screening process is simply not feasible or unrealistic for your school setting, it is acceptable to require parents to complete the screening process prior to sending their child to school. And so school staff will still be required to vigilantly assess students for symptoms within the school building throughout the day, and then we'll refer students to the clinic throughout the school day if that's necessary.
And Meredith, what is your opinion on how do you guarantee or how do you encourage parents to do that before school? And how do you know that your message of that this is a requirement for your kids to come to school, how do you communicate that message to them?
Yeah, that's a great question and circles all the way back to Chris with the impact group, being very transparent with plans and over communicating with parents what policy and what plans are and the why behind that policy. So this is what we've decided is best for the students here in this district, and this is why, and this is how. And so that policy, along with any other COVID policy or any new policy that parents are going to be experiencing, needs to be communicated on the front end as much as possible through various modalities.
Colleen, are you back?
So Tammy, I'm back.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure the message with COVID and everything is there are no guarantees. That's like the internet. Sorry, you guys. So I'll jump back in, Tammy. Thank you. Good PSI teamwork there. So what changes can we expect, Carly and Meredith, at schools for the school clinic operations that we've been used to as parents and school leaders?
Sure. Schools have, the recommendation is that schools should have a well clinic as well as an isolation area. Students who become ill at school have always had their temperature taken. However, now that temperature check and assessment will need to take place prior to the student even entering that clinic space. Students that are exhibiting symptoms consistent with COVID-19 will be sent to that isolation area to be picked up by their family. So the school clinic should be reserved for well students that need to have chronic conditions managed, asthma, allergies, diabetes, seizure management, injuries attended to, or medications administered. Just circling back to what Tammy had just asked, and again, the messaging in the beginning of the webinar, it is of utmost importance that parents understand that students will be sent home more often than they were before this pandemic, even for mild symptoms, if those symptoms are consistent with COVID-19. So school policy, in accordance with the local health department and the student's healthcare provider, will assist us in determining a student's ability to return to school. But all of that new policy surrounding clinic operations and excluding from school really needs to be communicated and understood by parents on the front end so that students can stay in school, so that we can heed the American Academy of Pediatrics advice that it is best that students are in school. So in order to do that, we need to do some safeguards to keep school the safe environment that, the safest environment that we can.
And so in that, and keeping it the safest environment, and whether to mandate, was it 2 hours ago now or something? We have had a lot of parent and questions about this. Wearing a mask all day is intolerable. Isn't it bad for kids?
No, it's okay. It's not. Masks are permeable. When you walk past someone in a mask and you smell their perfume, or you walk into a store and you smell something cooking, you can still breathe through a mask. It is not intrinsically dangerous. It is uncomfortable. And as someone who has to wear a mask all day at work, I get it. It's either too loose and I'm like constantly adjusting it and touching my face, which is what we're not supposed to do, or it's too tight and I'm breathing it in as I'm talking. It can be very uncomfortable. I think to that end, schools and businesses are sensitive to that, and they will build in mask breaks when children are spaced and they're in outdoor spaces. They will be able to take off their masks and breathe a little easier for a while.
Good, thank you. What about, daily functions at school? So what about kids using the restroom at school during this time? Is my child going to even be allowed to use the restroom? Or what are we hearing from schools about that?
So all surfaces that are commonly touched in school buildings are going to be wiped down several times a day. Different districts are doing different things. Some have one cohort in the morning, one in the afternoon. Some have different days of the week that different cohorts or groups of kids are going to be allowed in the building. But the truth is, it doesn't matter if it's the same people all day long. It's still a bunch of people, and so they're going to have to wipe down those surfaces quite a few times during the day. So I would say surfaces like door handles, light switches, toilet flushers, things like that, faucets in the bathroom. Those are all going to be wiped with EPA approved antiviral, antibacterial things throughout the day. I think also that the spacing is going to be interesting in the bathroom. They will limit the number of students that are allowed in any given closed space, so certainly a bathroom, at any time. And then hopefully the schools will have available Purell or hand sanitizer to clean before you walk in and then after you leave. Certain dryer units, like forced air units, are contraindicated when you have droplets. You don't want to force them in someone's direction. So they should use towels in the bathrooms if possible and disable those units.
And Carly, if I could just piggyback on that too, one of the recommendations, we've been doing a decent amount of school walkthroughs with the UH infectious disease team, your colleagues, and keeping the door handle or the opportunity for the door handle to be touched, reducing that. So a lot of these bathrooms in schools have like a double door. So there's an outside door and an inside door, and you have to touch the handle on both of those doors to actually get into the restroom. And so thinking through that for the restroom and then really any other place with the door handles to reduce those high touch surfaces, keep one of those doors open if you can, still afford the privacy in the bathroom on the inside. So.
Perfect. Thank you. That is very helpful. So coming back from summer, some students and their families have gone on vacations and attended gatherings. Other students and families have really stayed home. What would you guys say about the best way to keep students and staff safe as school is reopening?
Shall I run through our mnemonic?
Yes.
So trying to make everything easy because there's a lot to remember. So the A, B, C, Ds. So A stands for always wear your mask, especially if you're going to be around people who don't live in your house. Even if you're outside, you know, we make exceptions for the kids while they're on the playground and they're properly spaced. But when you leave your house, always wear your mask. Expect that you're going to run into someone. And this way that'll help you stay as safe as possible and help protect the people around you. B stands for be aware of the symptoms of COVID. So this runs into what you were saying earlier, Meredith, about fever and not sending your child to school sick, not going to work or to school if that's where you work sick. Don't be a hero. Someone else had mentioned that earlier also. So don't be a hero. Don't, muscle your way through it. If you have any of the symptoms of COVID, and there's just a tremendous list of them, but if you have, in particular as an adult, fever, difficulty breathing, muscle aches, chills, cough, new onset cough, then just don't go. Be aware of those symptoms. Stay away from people when you have them. Stay away from people who have them. That was A, B. C is cleaning your hands and cleaning your space. We heard a lot about that today. Soap and water for 20 seconds. Everybody knows how to sing happy birthday. Trying to maintain that level of cleanliness for yourself and for the space around you. And then D stands for distance physically, but not emotionally. So make sure that you're still reaching out to people in a way that's not physically in their space, but don't distance yourself from friends or relatives emotionally. You can still FaceTime, you can still play games over the internet. You can still visit safely outdoors if you're spaced appropriately.
Thank you. So we are actually out of time for everybody's sections with the ending of that. We did get a number of questions. We only have a couple minutes, so I'm going to try to get to a few, and then I just have some wrap-up information for all the attendees. So one of the questions, Dr. Scott Poland, somebody asked a question of you. What about students who have actually had COVID? So what about the social emotional return to school after the student has actually experienced COVID? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I do, and I certainly want everybody else to weigh in. This is really complicated because, you know, we want to protect the privacy of the student. We don't want them to be bullied and harassed, yet it seems like key school personnel, like the nurse, should be informed, and all the adults need to know something about maintaining that privacy and hopefully not overreacting. But I'll let others weigh in. It's actually the first time I've heard that specific question, but it's an important one.
Yeah,
Does anybody else on the panel want to weigh in? Julie?
I could piggyback just a little bit, but I guess it's going to start with, at the beginning of the school year, really creating a culture and a tone that we need to respect everyone. We're not going to tolerate negative comments, bullying, discrimination, and setting a culture that we're going to be accepting of everyone. And you're going to see some things, and maybe explaining some kids are going to be in and out, and it may not be to this, and that reason. And laying out the groundwork then and being consistent with your messaging throughout, that may help things as students are in and out of the classroom and are returning.
Yeah, great suggestion. Carly, yes.
The other thing to remember is the more we see this, the more we're learning those antibodies are not protective for a lifetime. So you're going to treat that child just like you would anybody else, because there's a chance they can get COVID again too.
Yeah, great point. Appreciate that. That was a great question. I have another one that's interesting. Chris, this might be in your realm. Somebody asked, what do you do about negative Facebook groups? So a lot of schools have their official Facebook, school Facebook groups, and then there's parent groups. What do you do about that? Should you address it or should you ignore it?
So our policy has long been to address comments with the factual components of district communication, which means for the layperson, if we have said it already in a public forum, we're going to simply restate our position on social media. However, we would highly encourage all of our school leaders not to engage in the highly emotionally charged back and forth that can occur inside of Facebook comments. I think most of the school administrators that are listening can attest that's a never-ending cycle. And so unless it deals with extreme health or safety concerns, obviously if folks have made threats, we're going to handle it appropriately and go into crisis communications mode. But our simple suggestion is to continue to reiterate the communications that have already been provided in another fashion.
Okay, appreciate that. We are getting a lot of questions, and I'm not necessarily sure there's an exact answer to this, but I'm gonna So what happens if a student, number one, there's a couple parts of this. A student tests positive for COVID. Is there going to be a recommendation about quarantine a whole class, or just if some of the people in class have symptoms? That's the first part, I think, that we can throw. Actually, I'm going to stop there because the second part will be longer. So Carly or Meredith, maybe one of you guys think you want to try that one?
Sure. You want me to do it?
Yeah, well, I'll give our first little part, and then you can give all the background. So the guidance right now, thus far, COVID positive cases are going to be guided by the health department's going to help us with what we need to know and who needs to quarantine. And so what we've been told at this point in time is that, and this is where I'm going to dish off to you, Dr. Wilbur, the prolonged exposure comes into play here, and what that definition is and who meets that prolonged exposure definition in the classroom setting or in a school setting. And Carly, if you wanted to share about prolonged exposure and what that looks like and what that means, I think that would help.
So I think the terminology of close contact is what we need to focus on as well. So you've got, let's say, a person who tests positive for COVID. And then the question is who around them really needs to either be tested or evaluated or quarantined. So that prolonged exposure that you said, Meredith, is what some other texts also call close exposure or close contact. So if you are properly masked and you are properly distanced, even indoors in your classroom, that's not a close exposure. Certainly a parent of a child who was in the classroom with the kid with the COVID, that's not an exposure. An exposure to an exposure is not an exposure. Now, eventually, this is how that gets contagious, but that doesn't mean that that parent needs to freak out. So for the people who were for more than 15 minutes within 6 feet of that patient, within 2 days of when they had symptoms, and they tested positive, then those patients need to be evaluated. But they don't need to necessarily go to the doctor. They don't need to necessarily get tested. They just need to stay in their own space so that should they become, in the next 2 to 14 days, symptomatic and contagious, they don't exponentially spread this to others.
Okay, up to that is that, so if a kid is at home for any reason, like a headache, when can they return, or how does that play in? And I know from being on a lot of these phone calls with university hospitals and you, Carly, that some of that's hard to answer at this point.
It just changed. The answer just changed. Like the CDC just changed their minds on Friday. Used to be 72 hours fever-free without any medications to keep you fever-free. Then you could return, and they just on Friday changed that to 24 hours. It is case dependent, it is symptom dependent, and I think that as the opening of school gets closer, PSI is planning to launch a little bit of a prescriptive roadmap of when patients with symptoms can return and what they'll need, whether it's just a note from the parent saying hasn't had a headache in 24 hours, we're good, or a note from the doctor saying he came, he had strep, we treated it, and now he can come back.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. You're absolutely right. We've been working with Dr. Wilbur on that prescriptive process, a flow chart for how to exclude students that are symptomatic at school, and then when they can return. And so we do actually have that ready, and we're preparing a training for our staff on that document very soon. So more information to come. But in addition to that tool, we have a letter for parents for a COVID positive case, similar to how we in school health here at PSI have letters for a lot of other things that we send home. And in addition to that, we also have a medical clearance form. So for those students that were required to see the physician or to see their healthcare provider, what happened there? They were evaluated and they can return, they were evaluated and they're going to be tested, or they were tested and they're positive, those sorts of things. So a lot of that gets into the granular part, to use Chris's word from earlier, of how schools will operate, especially clinic operations. And so I realize there's a lot of staff on the webinar today. I appreciate that. Thank you for being on here. Very good questions and more information to come. As Dr. Wilbur just said, it changes so readily. We're going to try to prepare a training that is consistent with current guidelines and issue that out here very soon.
Thank you. So we are going to wrap up the webinar. I cannot thank all these experts enough. There was so much great information, and we have the results of the polls, which we will definitely get anybody additional information that would like it. Once we're done today, you will be given the opportunity to provide webinar feedback through a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We hope you found this useful and that you'll participate in future PSI webinars. Watch for those offerings in your email. If you attended this webinar in its entirety and provide feedback, you will receive a certificate of attendance from PSI. Please allow about a week for us to get that out to you, and it will be emailed to you with the email that you registered. If you have any additional questions or would like additional information about PSI services, our contact information is on the screen as well. And we also are going to try to gather all the questions that we had and maybe try to send something out to you all. We just have to look at that and get that put together. So again, appreciate all the expert partners so very much. And, you know, the Ohio Freight, we're all in this together. We're going to figure it out, you guys. So thank you guys all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So.